Yeah. Humpday
Oh,
Q&A.
the music's over. All right, Dash, you go back, hide in the corner again. All right.
There you go.
Good morning, Simon, or good evening to you, I guess, right?
Good morning, good evening, good night, as the words of the
Yes.
Truman Show.
And to all the ships at sea.
Let's crack on with the intro, and we'll get to your questions.
Yeah.
We always have some questions in the queue.
Already. Wonderful. It's good stuff. All right. So we have, I guess it's my job now since I'm the number position tonight. All right. So we've got some rules, very simple rules, easy to follow. Be nice, respectful, constructive when interacting with us on YouTube and interacting with others. There are others there too, not just us. Don't post anything adult. That's obvious because we're not designed for kids, but we do have kids in the audience. Don't advertise or promote anything. That's strictly reserved to us. And I'm sure we'll be plugging Fluttercon in a few minutes, right? And and don't spam. Don't keep posting the same thing over and over again. I have the power to make you go away, so don't make me use that power. Also, if you've asked a question, be patient. It's in our queue if you precede it with Q:, and we'll get to it. If you ask it again, it gets moved to the bottom of the queue. You don't want to lose your place in line, so don't post the same question twice. Very silly. Also, any kind of harassment, we will use the ban hammer. So don't harass. We have controls for this, but do have a good time. We have a good time doing this show. That's why we keep coming back. And so you should have a good time too. You should enjoy our jokes, enjoy Simon's massively quick typing and Google skills, and enjoy my sort of strange commentary, and you'll have a good time for sure. So,
and let's do some brief introductions here. So my name's Simon Lightfoot, Flutter community leader. I do not work for Google. I do not work for Flutter. Neither does anyone on our channel today. But we do have members of the Flutter team come on and join us every now and again. Hopefully, we'll have some soon, actually. But I'm also the CTO of DevEngines London, and you can follow me on Twitter at DevEngines London. Scott can't be with us today; he's very busy. But Randall.
Hi, I'm Randall Schwartz. I'm a Dart and Flutter Google developer expert, which means that I spend probably far too long every day looking at Discord and Slack and formerly Reddit and Stack Overflow, looking for your questions, which I answer all day. And that's also kind of what I'm doing here too. So it's kind of the same thing, but I also speak at various GDG meetups and try to get as many virtual conferences in as I can, which is your segue to
we have our Flutter conference coming up next week, and that's Fluttercon. Thank you very much for that segue. Fluttercon is happening 5th to 7th of July, Berlin. If you want, get your tickets now. If you stay later on the show, I'm going to see if I can get you guys a discount code. So stick around, and we'll get you a discount. Awesome. In the meantime, we have some guests introduced.
Cool.
Guest John, welcome to the stream.
How's it going?
Please introduce yourself.
Good. Yeah. So intro, John Wheezy. Those that join us every week probably have seen me a few times, but I am a software engineer for Microsoft. I spend my days building Android stuff. and
I
manage the medium for the Flutter community, and hang out in Discord as often as I can, helping Randall answer the lots and lots of questions that we get in Discord.
And many of those are beginner questions. So I see that question in the chat already. Yes, that the Discords do have you can ask anything there. Yep. Truly, you can ask anything there. And I tell you, we've seen anything asked there. Yep. So
and Randall, you may want to dump the link in there, since obviously it doesn't let me do it. So
yeah. Okay, right. I will post that. Let's see. I can post it.
All of the community stuff can actually be accessed from flutter.dev/community.
That's what I was about.
Discord, Slack, and all that kind of fun stuff. And we have another guest joining us, Danielle. Joining us on stage.
Hi there. It's been a couple weeks.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
Good to see you again.
I'm in my new office here, so you can see my new background.
Yeah, I'll go back to the place.
We were commenting about
that's a virtual background. Yeah. Is that real? No, it's real. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I'm gonna go back and play some Rampage is looking good right now.
Yeah, Rampage.
Boom, that's real.
Boom, boom. Yes, that was fun.
Talk about background. John, what's happened to the Flutter F?
I've got the Flutter F. I've got
you had one that was like the wall size.
Oh, the big one, the big Flutter F. So I took it down when I had to do some rearranging, but I'm in the process. I started designing out the replacement that's going to go on the wall.
Oh, yes.
The lit up Flutter F.
So you had to get the F out of there?
Yes, I did. Exactly. That's one way to look at it.
Oh, dear. It's
this early in the show already, and I've got bad puns. Yes.
Yeah. We somehow avoided the Q joke, and then now we're back to stuff like that.
That's a good point. Get your questions now in the live chat with a Q, and we'll get your questions. Danielle, I don't think you gave a brief introduction. Do you want to just give a quick intro?
Oh, hi, yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Danielle House. Yes, if you watch all the time, you've seen me a few times too, so that's good. I'm trying to be as regular as I can with it. Last couple of weeks, I've been actually in the process of moving, so I now live outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and so
I could see process of moving taking place when you have 3 game arcade machines.
Well, she's got a priority street; those are set up, but she's still got boxes on the couch that look like they're not.
Exactly. Yeah, I moved it because I've got on my monitor. I've got the Mac Mini over on one corner, so I moved the camera so when I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like I'm looking over here. So,
what occasions you got? Pac-Man, Gallagher, and what's the other one?
Okay, so these are arcade one-ups. So these are like a little bit there. So it's Rampage, but it's also got Joust and Defender and Gauntlet.
So this is the person that can really play Ready Player One, like down to the T, right? Joust, here it is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. By the way, I thought they did a good job on the movie of not going into that kind of minutia that was happening in the book and doing it, but keeping kind of the idea of it. I actually really appreciate that movie as an adaptation. Anyway, I've switched my real quick. Yeah, sorry.
To that point, I was just going to say it's kind of interesting, right? Like, there's so much story you can get into a book, like 20 hours, 30 hours, in a good book, right? Mm-hmm. And there's just no way that you can squeeze it down into 2 hours. Even Lord of the Rings, and it's sort of like 3 epic long, like 3-hour marathon films, right? Doesn't come near to the content that's in the books.
No.
And it's kind of interesting, right? Like people complain about that because they read the book and they go to see the film, but actually, I think it's an artistic adaptation of the book, and I think that's key to the point of that you have to remember is they're 2 independent works of art that you can appreciate independently.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I told my kids when they read the book and then they wanted to see the movie. I told them, if you go into the movie expecting it to be what you read in the book, you'll be disappointed. If you go into it thinking it's going to be its own story that loosely follows the book, then you'll be okay.
The other side of this I find kind of interesting is that your imagination pictures something that's unique to your experience, right? So that you have a picture of what it could be, right? Like they say a throne, and you imagine the throne that you maybe saw last on some TV show or something, right? Or something like that, Whereas for someone else, it would be something completely different. And I think that's the key as well. You can never take what you imagine from a book and expect to see it on screen, right? Very rarely have you seen like a one-to-one.
Well,
And often, unless I was just gonna say, and often, unless the book is written from the screenplay, it's going to definitely be different. If people have a book out published and then it gets turned into a movie, it'll never be like the book. It's just guaranteed, pretty much.
We lost the John. I'm sure he'll be back though.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel. Go on.
No, okay, yeah. I was gonna say other adaptations that are totally different. I like were The Martian and The Princess Bride, which are both cases that are totally different than the books, but I think the movies did a great job. All right. Anyway, I lead a small team of Flutter developers, and I am talking at Fluttercon too. So I'll be in Berlin next week. So if you see me there, run up and find me with my purple hair. And
I'll still be in Portland, Oregon, in my underground bunker.
When are you able to travel again?
I just got my hip replacement scheduled. It's Talk Like a Pirate Day, September 19th. So that means I get to go in and go, "Arr, you be cutting off me leg." Arr. Yeah.
All right. Where's me peg leg?
just let the sharks chop it off.
A mahogany pig leg. Yes, I want a good one.
All right, Randall. What's a pirate's favorite letter?
R.
You would think so. But it turns out his first love was the C.
Oh dear.
I yield my crown to you. You are definitely got the #1 running joke now for today. All right. Now I got to think stuff up. Now I have to
challenge. What have you done? What have you done? John, are you going to be able to make it to Fluttercon?
I am not. I'm going to be in lovely Orlando, Florida, hanging out in the Orlando Convention Center for volleyball for 6 days starting Saturday. My son is on one of the top teams in the country, so they're hoping to win the national championship next week. So thanks. Yeah, so it'll be fun. It'll be fun. We'll see. They came close last year, and this year they've added a few guys, so it'll be a good one.
Nice.
So I think I just learned that volleyball in Spanish is volleyball. They just borrowed the word. It's weird. Anyway, sorry.
I mean, it's kind of funny. Like you have a lot of languages out there where there's like a word that people use. I mean, like English has a lot of French words in it, right? Where you take on the words that have meaning about to describe some object or something, right? Like here's a good one: rendezvous. Mm-hmm. Rendezvous, right? But everyone says, like the Americans say that as well, maybe not as it's not a common thing to say, but you know what I mean? Like it's something you would say to indicate that, right?
Yeah.
So,
or people misunderstand what RSVP means. They think it just means reply if you're going, but it actually begs a reply no matter whether you're going or not.
Yep.
Please respond. RSVP. Répondez s'il vous plaît. Never mind. All right. Yeah, yeah. All these people that have never answered RSVPs now are going to be in trouble.
Right. So as we said in the introduction,
This week in language. All right.
Make sure you get your questions in the live chat with the queue in front, and we'll pick them out and add them to our queue.
We're just stalling until there's enough questions for us to start drilling into. That's all we're doing here today.
We want to keep the show. I think both myself and Danielle need to be working on our slides. So we're going to try and keep this as short as possible. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything to present, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I've got to stop at the top of the hour myself. So
I've got a backlog now of actual real paying work to do. So I've got to figure out how to get to that right after this show and right after my nap after this show, I should say. All right.
All right. I mean, let's get to the first question then.
Let's do it. Do you want me to read those?
Go for it,
Simon. Okay. So Mona Louise says, how to implement SSL pinning in the Flutter app, where to store the certificate.pem and in a code inside asset folder or remote config or some best approach for security purposes. And if possible, can you show code? Well, Simon, this is for you probably.
I don't know if I can show code. I have done it before. There's an interesting aspect to this, right? So let me explain, first of all, for those that don't know what certificate pinning is. We said SSL pinning here. It's also called certificate pinning. And Mona, if you're searching for it, search certificate pinning. That's the go-to name for it. It's interesting because if let's say you're using a let's get this right. let's say you're making network connection straight from your Flutter code, like using the HTTP package or the inbuilt HTTP IO in the Dart IO package, the HTTP stuff. That will all use what's called a security context. And inside that, you can define what certificates you will accept and not accept. And I can show you a couple of we can go through some code briefly maybe on that point. But that only secures those connections. Now, if you depend on a plugin and that plugin makes network requests, those are not going through that mechanism. So they're not secured, right? So you have to be cautious about how you implement certificate pinning with Flutter for that point. You have to put it in both places. Now that means that you need to implement certificate pinning in iOS. In let's say if you're doing an iOS deployment, you have to do it on the iOS side, you have to do it in the Android side, and you have to do it in the Flutter side. Now, for most, if you can, try and get all your network connections to go over the Dart side, and then it's nice and simple, right? So that's one thing to take away from this. Yes. So let me see if I can. There is actually a. Hang on. Let's see if I can find it briefly. There is actually a page. Here we go. I found it in my first Google. This is awesome. There is a section inside of. If I can find it. The one time I can't find it. Where is this page? Hang on, let's see, pinning. If I can find it.
John posted something in the chat.
Well, I'll pop this up on stream and I'll post it. This is the Android page on SSL pinning, and it briefly tells you need to go to the network security, provides pinning capabilities, and there's a whole section inside of the network security stuff. Let me see if I can share this on stream so we're all seeing the same thing. Bear with me. Share. Let's see if this works. It can only go wrong. Right. So let's see if I can. I think it's good enough. Restricting your apps to specific certificates is basically what you're trying to do. Oh, I didn't explain what it is. Sorry. Let me explain what this is. So what this is the fact that you make an SSL connection and you're assuming that the SSL connection is secure, and by default it is, and that's because your device has a list of what's called CAs or certificate authorities, and these are companies that you trust that their certificates have been issued to real entities and they haven't linked their private key. So this makes it secure and means that no one can listen in on the traffic. However, what can actually happen, and this is actually by you can call it by design, but it can be possible. You can use like Charles Proxy, Proxyman. There's a bunch of proxy softwares, and what they do is they do SSL proxying. And what it is you set up the proxy in your network, let's say in your Android device or somewhere else on your Mac, who knows. And any SSL connection will get relayed through the SSL proxy, and it will issue certificates from the local certificate authority it makes. And you add that CA certificate for the proxy software to your device. And what this means is suddenly your device is now trusting all of these proxy connections. Now, this means that someone can sniff all your SSL traffic from your application. Now, if you're a banking application, you don't want anyone seeing the traffic that you're transmitting, because that's very much secure, right? A good example of this is, let's say you had a login to your app and it was sending a username and password over the wire, over SSL. So it's all encrypted, it's all good. However, if someone's proxying that, they can then sniff that traffic and see what the password was, right? So by doing certificate pinning, what you're saying is I only trust certificates made by this, issued by this certificate authority. And in doing so, they cannot man in the middle attack your SSL connections. So that's very important for banking and for other security measures. And if we go back to this website, basically it's saying that it's briefly kind of goes into this here, and it says you can restrict it in your network security configuration. And if you follow that, pin certificates, basically you supply an XML file and you give it the digest identifiers for and the subdomains that you want to protect, basically. There's a whole section in here because you can also sort of opt out of clear text, and you can also do debug overrides so that you can on your debug flavors say includes your proxy configuration if you want to. So on your debug builds, you can still proxy and still see your own traffic for debugging purposes, perhaps, right? So it's all in here, but this is all very much, you need to go into your Android subfolder and make these changes, right? Now, there is already a network security config in there. That's issued with every Flutter app, and that's because in debug mode, it needs to send stuff in clear text. That's to your local machine for doing your hot reloading and things like that. So.
I also want to add that that man in the middle thing is not just about an attack vector. I frequently work sitting in restaurants because I like having all the background noise and I like having the food brought to my table. And that means I'm often on the local hotspot, whatever they purchased for their Wi-Fi. And from time to time, I am either speed throttled or blocked on some websites I'm trying to contact. And the only way they would know, because I'm already using an SSL connection, is that they're blocking the actual content that's going across the wire. So I know that they're locally decoding my SSL connection and then re-encoding it for the other end, for the other half. And so this happens far more than you know. Far more. Many places that you've used. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I want to be clear about something, actually. So something that most people don't realize with SSL connections, the initial SSL connection is made by DNS. So that means that you make it, let's say you're making a connection to Google, to YouTube, right? It's literally your phone makes a connection of DNS that says, okay, youtube.com to the local DNS service of the Wi-Fi, or that'd be your ISP. And they'll say, what is the IP address I need to connect to for youtube.com? And then we will return back the IP address, and then it will make that connection. And so there's actually, and part of that initial handshake is also sending youtube.com for the certificate to check against. So the connection, that part of the host name of who you're connected to is not encrypted. So they can shape traffic based on that. However, SSL man-in-the-middle attacks are more common nowadays than ever before, because I think over 50% of the internet or most common websites or something, I can't remember, there's like a top, I don't know, 5,000 websites or 100,000, I don't know what the number is, are now like SSL encrypted. Most websites now use SSL encryption certificates because the price came down. Certificates were originally like, you'd pay like $5,000 for a certificate. It went down, I remember going down to like about $2,000, 1,500, down to like, sub 1,000. And suddenly the floor dropped out of the market. Now you go get them for like $30 a piece. And now there's trusted root certificate authorities that are giving them for free. That's Let's Encrypt, and they use
Let's Encrypt,
automated protocol, and lots of suppliers issue that. So yeah, SSL is everywhere now, which is great, but also can be captured. So coming back to briefly on this question, and we continue this question for those that just joined. It's about certificate pinning and how to do that. If we jump back over to, so I can get that off screen. Hopefully, maybe I can make that a bit bigger. So basically, underneath the HTTP library, if you use the HTTP package, it creates a HTTP client. Now you can actually create from the HTTP package your own IO client and give it your own custom HTTP client. But anyway, this is the underlying piece, and in the constructor, we'll skip all this. This tells you how to do it all. You can provide it a security context in the constructor, and the security context lets you tell it what certificates you trust. And down here, so first of all, when you create your security context, you say with trusted roots false by default, which means you don't trust anything, right? Normal connections, this is set to true because you want to trust the standard root providers on your device. And then instead, you then do set trusted certificate bytes, or from a file if you have in a file, and that basically means that this connection only trusts the ones that you add using this method. And that's how you can pin certificates, right? You're not denying you're not denying all others, you're only allowing these specific ones, right? So that's how you do it inside of Flutter. And yeah, if you go like pub and the HTTP package, you'll see that it has it's got documentation briefly. You can import this directly. It's called IO client. This cannot work, as far as I know, this doesn't work with the HTTP client for web, because web has its own set of restrictions. So just let you know. But yeah, you'll see here when you create an IO client for the HTTP package, you should specify your own HTTP client. And that is what you put your security context on. And this is just your standard thing that you normally use, post, put, so on. which most people are kind of used to. You just do. If you just use the global, by the way, just to be clear, if you use the global statics, then you can use HTTP overrides. If I go back, there is a way, I forget, bear with me here because it's been a while, HTTP overrides. This allows you to override the behavior on when you're constructing these. And in here, you can override this function. I forget where.
Cool.
Yeah. So you can create, there's a global one, there's zoned as well. But there's basically, you can go get the current one and you can also set the current one. And this allows you to override the create HTTP client. And then so you can specify new security context, as you can see here. So again, you can do all this. There's a few different ways there, but basically, in short, you're saying only want to allow that certificate. You said the other part of the question was, where do you store the certificate? To be honest, that's entirely up to you. So obviously replacing a certificate. So if someone was attacking your software and wanted to replace that certificate, that's always, at the end of the day, that's always something that can occur. It's only a matter of time until they can find or decrypt the place where you put your encrypted certificate. It has to be used by the app, so it has to be shipped. But it's a public certificate. It doesn't have to be kept private. The idea is just verification. Most people aren't going to go to those lengths to hack your app, but it's always a possibility. To be clear, banking doesn't use pinning in this sense. They don't have a global key. Instead, what they'll do is they'll do what's called client certificates. And this allows that each person that signs up to, let's say each time you log in, it creates a private key inside your secure enclave on your device, which cannot be got to. And then the public key is sent over to the bank, and the bank literally authenticates based on that. So no transaction can be captured, but that is a lot different. There's a lot more involved in doing that than just standard certificate pinning. So depends on what level of security you're looking for. However, where you want to store it, you can just base64 encode the string, the contents of the file. There's literally a command in Mac and Linux, and you can store it in Windows, base64, and you just give it the file and it gives you back a string. So chuck that string straight in a global constant inside your app, and then you can just use that and do base64.decode in your Flutter app at runtime when you create your security context, and that'll do the job. But yeah, obviously that's now a string. It's base64. If someone wanted to go look and find the public key, they can probably find it easy. You can start things like, I'm going to ship a fixed private key, or each time I build the app, it generates a new private key, uses code generation to like include the file and encrypt it. You can go all out there and go all crazy, right? The question is, what's reasonable in your scenario? And to be honest, base64 encoding a certificate, chucking in there is good enough for most situations. All right. Cool. Sorry, I kind of took that one to death.
So we're trying to do a slightly shorter show today because a lot of us have some pressing deadlines. So at that rate, we can take maybe 5 more minutes of questions, and then it's a hard cutoff, and we're just going to try to run through as much as we can. Yeah, so 5 more minutes, and then we're cutting the questions off. Sorry about that. We've got a lot of questions in the queue already, like 13 more questions to go through. So let's do it.
So about questions. Next question.
Yeah. How to use the accelerometer? Well, there's a package for that.
There's a package. I'm kind of curious. Has anyone here actually been using the accelerometer in any apps?
I played with it once, and it was too loose. It was like waggling over the place, and I couldn't tell what the numbers were doing. And it turns out that there's a technique, like when there's a few compass packages that actually slow down the rotation by using sort of deltas and trends that you kind of have to do if you're going to use something like compass.
There's actually a standard, I can't remember the algorithm name, but essentially it's a low pass filter, right? So you're getting rid of any high frequency noise. Because the sensors are so sensitive that you'll get this jitter, right? And you want to just make it smooth. And so basically it's called a low pass filter. But there is actually a type of low pass filter that's really good on the sensor data. I can't remember what it's called. However, plus.fluttercommunities.dev, what you'll find on that website, which I can bring up on the stream briefly, is the list of the Community Plus packages that are wonderfully worked on by our community. You can see here with all the support that they need is a sensors package. And if you go to the documentation of the sensors package, I can see it supports web, iOS, Android. I'm sure we'll get support on the other platforms if and when they're available. It's not very popular to have desktops have these things, but it is getting more popular nowadays than ever before for desktops to have accelerometers like laptops and so on. Anyway, so the sensors package allows you to get the gyro, magnetometer, and accelerometer events straight from the platform, and these come down as streams.
On Canadian TV, I actually played games with my laptop using the accelerometers. So there was this tilt ball game and all that stuff. And I actually ended up playing that game at home later that night, and I broke my laptop because I dropped it. So you do have to be careful.
Yeah,
it's like I was thinking that my one app I wanted to create was using the accelerometers to test how far you could throw your phone as a way of selling more phones. And apparently there was an app like that got pulled from the store because kids were like chucking their phones to try to get the high score.
Well, that's what led to the little loops on the Wii controllers, right? Because people were throwing their controller.
Yeah.
They needed to put,
there we go.
Have to tether yourself to your phone.
Right.
Briefly want to mention just a little bit more about sensors here, just for the people that need it at home. So if you go, you can go read up about sensors, but acceleration, right? That's how fast it's moving. Then you got your gyro, which is essentially about rotation, and then you have your magnetometer, which is about the compass, right? That's about where true north is, not north on your map, but true north. That's the magnetic north.
Magnetic north is not true north. Please don't confuse us.
Whatever it is, whatever way around it is.
It's magnetic north, not true north. True north is north on the map.
That's the one. Yeah, I mixed them up. But yeah. It's the other way around. So be cautious about that because you might mess up your calculations. However, so your device, since it's very common to want to get the angle, the unit angles of your device, and to do all that, instead of you having to process the gyro and the accelerometer yourself, which you'll need to do with the raw data events that come in, there are packages that do that. So we don't do that in the Plus. Now, I have used this Arium sensors before, but it looks like it's not been updated for 4 years. So I don't recommend this. Looks like there's a position sensors. I've never used it before. That's updated 17 months ago. Again, though, these things aren't like, they don't change all that often, right? But as we can see here, it looks like, rotation events, you get stream, and then you can get those details down. There you go. So there you go. Rotation events needs all three, combination of sensors. Game rotation is just these two. This is just these, and so on. So this, I'm guessing this package does the hard work of combining them, or it uses the platform to do it for you. So things like Android have a thing called the rotation vector, which is a sensor. It's a fake sensor which combines all the data for you. But that's like how you use the accelerometer and stuff.
I've seen apps in the App Store of being able to find studs by using the magnetometer as related to the position, and it can tell that there's some deviation in the compass because you're passing by some metal. So that's kind of cool if you want a stud finder.
So I did those packages where those apps that you can like look at the stars, right?
Yeah.
So you can move your phone up, and you're basically using your phone as like a window into the night sky. I did like a similar thing where there's like an AR thing where you just move your phone around and you see points of interest, right? Essentially like from Google's data set. But there, that was basically there's no like magic AR library. You're just doing the math of where's my phone in relation to the world, where's the device relating to that, and then you can then project it into your on top of your camera view. So it's interesting though, stuff. Right.
Fun stuff.
Next,
yes. How to implement code tampering protection in a Flutter app. There's packages for that.
I was going to say, use packages for that. So there's several companies that supply libraries for this stuff.
Yep.
And in briefly, code tampering, for those that don't follow this, is let's say you had a check when your app starts up that it checks to see is the license code that you entered a valid license code, and it goes off to the server to check, and it comes back with yes, it is, or no, it isn't. That's how you program this, right? And when the check comes back, the app goes, is it? Did it say yes? Brilliant. Then you're in. You've got the full product. Let's say. Now that check is a Boolean check. It comes down to checking a string if it's the same or something like that. And at the end of the day, it comes down to one simple check: is it a 1 or a 0? Is it true or is it false? There's people out there that will go in and find that one byte of machine code inside your app and flip the check so it goes, if it's not true. So basically, if you put a fake key in, then it's great, you did it, it's successful, and therefore they've gone around your sort of your license check, for example. So it gets complicated, but the point here is that's the sort of what code tampering is. Now, what you need to do to protect yourself against these things is essentially you hash the code. So that is, you take a hash of all the bytes of the machine code, and then when your app starts up, you do another hash of what's in memory, and if it's different, you go, it's been tampered with, I'm not going to run, and you just die or something, right? Now, truthfully, that's how these libraries work, but that's something you should implement. Go use libraries. You can get it wrong, and if you get it wrong, then it doesn't work. It doesn't protect you. So don't do that. There is recently on the market. It's called RASP. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called now. Hang on, let me see if I can dig it up here. It's real time. What's it? I can't remember what RASP is. I think runtime app self protection. And this kind of goes into there's a package, free RASP, which is by Talsec, which is an upcoming sort of provider of these services, community in-app protection, and it goes through the entire thing. I'll pop this link in the chat for those that want a solution. But in essence, if we scroll down, there's a bunch of configuration you have to do. But in the end, you get this, and this is, it's bigger for those. That's about as big as you're going to get. And basically saying, look, app integrity, that's the thing you're saying, code tampering, obfuscation, debug, is it running, is it privileged access, is it secure hardware, is it running on a simulator? You kind of get all these lovely callbacks, and then you can choose what to do. But so there's a package free RASP if you want to use it. And I've answered this brief in quite detail because the next question is how to implement jailbreak root detection, and that is the behavior of our app and devices root jailbreak is necessary to follow the same approach for developer mode. It's exactly what I just said. So it detects developer mode in there if you're running I think call it debug, and the same goes if it's rooted, if it's a secure device. So, but if you briefly, if you want to know, root detection is just simply, can I write to locations that only a rooted device can use? Is the root app so on Linux based systems, which is like most Android and iOS is different, but for the most part, is a program installed called SU, which is super user, and this is used to, switch user. Actually, I can't remember. Whatever, one of the two, and it's used so that you can actually switch from being a normal user to being a root user and have full control of your system. And this is not accessible to normal apps. So a lot of the stuff that goes into root detection is just seeing, do you have that app installed somewhere? Or do you have other apps installed on your device that are indicated that's rooted in some sense? Same goes for debug mode. You can actually go, for example, in Android, you can read the Android settings, global settings, and see if it's got developer mode enabled. But that's what this package does. So like, why do all of this stuff when there's a package that does it for you, right? So that's what I'd say. Next question. Lazar.
So laser JavaScript, something like that. Sorry if I've mispronounced that. I probably ruined it. I have an SVG icon with multiple layers, and I need to control color of each layer in the SVG. Is there any other way than loading all the SVGs as strings and changing the colors of all the XML tags? I hope there's something better. Probably not, though.
I don't. Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why you can't load, have a stack with with SVG of each layer, and then when you run the SVG picture, this is Flutter SVG library, it has a color override parameter, so you can just change the colors, and it means it doesn't have to reload, doesn't have to repass. It just changes the color of the content.
Does the library allow you to pull the layers though?
No, what I'm trying to say is once you separate the layers, you can load each one as a separate SVG.
Yeah, so you're saying take the SVG, separate it into individual layers as individual SVGs, and then
yeah. I mean, I guess right. So here's the thing, right? We talk about SVGs, but what an SVG is just a description of a path,
right?
So I'm interested to understand here if this is something that is dynamic. Is this SVG something you're downloading from a server? Is it changing all the time? But if you could just pre-process it as part of your step of building your app, just make separate files for each layer, load them up.
But at that point, is it the same amount of work or less work, one way or the other, loading in the string?
No, but if he needs dynamic
XML tags, and then
but what I'm trying to say is he says he needs to dynamically control the color of each layer.
Right.
So what I'm saying is like, sorry, yeah. But I mean, like, yeah, if load all that as strings, same difference, right?
Yeah.
It's simple colored icons. Yeah. So coming back to the question here, is there all SVGs as strings other than strings? I mean, you can use loads of them as files. I mean, how else? I mean, another thing you can do is you can actually open up your SVG, take each layer, ungroup all the components of the layer, and then do a union on the path. You get one path shape for that layer. You can extract the path text. This is like the description of where to curve and line to draw and so on. And then if you do that, there's actually I think it's called path painting, path drawing. Is that it? Path drawing, yeah, DN field. So this one is the package under the hood, which actually does all the from the SVG that does the drawing. So you can see here, what you do is you give it a path. So you'd have like each one. It's same as very similar to what you just said. You put the strings in there, but you pass it once, and then you get back out of it a path, and you can just say draw path, right? Away you go. It's that simple. Triangle path. So you actually get a path that you can actually just render in Flutter, and you inside whatever render you're doing, you can put whatever color, style, shape, whatever you want to do. But again, it depends on how complex your SVG is and what you're trying to do with it. I'll pop that library in the chat for you. But yeah,
cool.
It's definitely beats changing the colors in XML. Don't ever do that, and then having to repass the strings all the time. I mean, there's just no need. Once you've got the shape, the color is up to you. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Next.
Bartek says, I want to create a desktop app into which plugins written in any language can be dynamically added. Oh, no.
No, you can do that.
My first thought is WebSocket, but maybe there's a better solution, more efficient. Oh.
WebSocket.
For plugin?
For what?
No.
For desktop?
No. So forget WebSocket.
You had me until WebSocket. Yes.
I know. So any language. So let's be clear. If you can make any, so you say any language, just put that off the table, right? Because languages are all different. They all have different ways of doing stuff, right? So just throw that away. However, most languages that can be used in a desktop compiled situation will have symbols, is what they export, right? And these are things that can be imported by another application. So, for example, on Windows, you have a lot of DLL files. These are dynamically linked libraries. And this is how you can modularize code and have it loaded at runtime into your program. The same goes on Mac, it's dylib or dynamic library. And on Linux, it's .so. .so is kind of interplays with dylib on Mac in certain situations, depends on the loader. But in general, that can load code dynamically. And what you want to do that is there's actually a part and parcel of Dart, actually. Let me see if I can bring this up on the API. It has an API for loading them. So if I bring this up, it's dynamic library. There you go. With all native libraries. This is the class you're looking for. And there you go. Load memory from symbols with memory addresses, blah, blah, blah. So basically, you can load it from the current executable, or you can give it a path to your dynamic library. So this is your plugin, right? Wherever you compile plugin is. And once you've opened it up, you can then use this lookup function to look up a pointer to whatever the symbol is. That symbol is a native pointer to FFI. This is a foreign function interface. This is how you access raw bytes from other programs and software and so on. And this pointer can point to a function, it can point to a variable, it can point to a lot of things. You can see a bool, double, float. You can also have a native function pointer, and there's actually a way of providing. You can look up a function. There's actually a function. I can't remember what it is, but basically, you can supply your Dart function syntax and then the native function syntax, and then it will convert it for you. Convert to Dart function automatically marshalling the arguments as function. There you go. There's a bunch of stuff in there. Go look up the FFI stuff. There's actually a page on Dart FFI, which probably covers the C interrupt with FFI. There you go. It says C, right? But C is the underlying starting point for all of these languages, if that kind of makes sense. If they all use symbols. So don't specifically read C here and say, oh, only C, right? But there's a bunch of content. I'll pop it in the chat. But in short, that's how you access content from another application or another library that you load. So you could just load any library that's on Windows, if it's on there, or Mac or whatever, and start looking at the symbols. There is command line utilities to dump the symbols from a library, and then normally there'll be like API documentation. But if you're making your own plugin architecture, get back to the question. If you're making your own plugins, then you would say you make a definition, say you must export a symbol called plugin table or plugin function table, and it gives you back an array of functions. And the first function will always open, the second function will always close, the third function is write. Whatever the functions are that you want to use your application to use, like get, logo, I don't know, write settings, whatever those functions are, and then you just call those functions essentially, and you can do it that way. But yeah,
the history of why it's the C interface is that C was sort of the first one to market that had like low-level operations that where you could actually build systems programming with that wasn't just simply assembly. And the C calling convention for what a subroutine pushes on the stack, lets the subroutine do its thing, and then return values back from the stack is very, very simple to implement. And so that became sort of the de facto standard for how everybody talks to everybody else, regardless of what their particular languages are. They would use C sort of as the common watering hole for that.
Good old Dotto.
Yeah, I want to mention that what we're just talking about, if you want to go look up, it's called calling convention.
Yes.
This is the underlying low-level mechanism that sort of native machine code uses to communicate between functions. It's like what parameters push the stack, what's keeping registers, and it's called an ABI or application binary interface. There's a bunch of information on this, and there's common. So for x86, which is an architecture I know quite well, there are common practices for this. If I quickly scooch down here, so this is the common one, C declare, which is the one we're just talking about. Which is any C declaration for style function. There's also other variations as Syscall's oblique. I'm trying to find Pascal is another one that was very common back in the day. Standard call is another one with the two APIs and so on. And these can all be called fast call is another one. So anyway, there's a bunch of them. But again, it's how you communicate with native functions, and you have to run into like it's not simple, right? This is why like most languages don't have this capability, is because you're going at the very raw levels of a stack of the sort of software stack, and there are dragons right there. You do it wrong and your app will crash, right? And there's no coming back from it. It's dead. So be cautious about how you handle native operations for sure. All right, next. Oh, any hints? I kind of covered that. All right, moving on.
How do we make our Flutter apps accessible intuitively? What are the key things to take care of to improve this area? Actually, it might be a web question too, right?
Well, I've looked at this a little bit, and my first instinct on this is you don't have the right intuition to do this intuitively. If you're not suffering with these things, you don't know what it is. And one of the I was watching a talk on accessibility at one point, and they were talking about how proud they were. They'd come up with some really super accessible feature that was amazing, and they built it, but they hadn't really talked to anybody that was going to be using it. And so it made a lot of sense to them. they make it, they build it, they put it out, and not only was it not useful, it was actually kind of offensive the way they had done it. And it was all because they didn't know. They came into it in the right place. They were really thinking, heavy duty stuff for that. So my first instinct is don't do it intuitively. Be very conscious about it and seek out, how to do this, and don't try to figure it out yourself per se. A lot of very smart people have put a lot of work into how to do this. And the other thing I want to say is it's not just the screen reader. A lot of people are, even at Flutter Interact, I guess it was the one in New York. There was a talk on accessibility there. It was very good, and it ended with the screen reader. It was, there was a blind Googler that was there, and they were going through it, and they were going, showing how he could use the accessibility with Flutter and stuff like that. That's all he talked about really was screen reader. And so there are a lot of other areas of accessibility. So there's people that are deaf is an obvious one, or hard of hearing. There's people who can't like hit a button with any kind of they got a shake or a tremor, or they just don't have the control for that. There are people whose cognitive abilities are not as able to figure out complex things if they run into it. So there's a lot of areas for that. And so after I've mentioned that there's a lot of things to it, I want to kind of come back around though and say, but get something in there. Pay attention to it and do something. Don't let the fact that it's a huge space that a lot of things to do stop you from getting something in there and then improving. But it's much better. The last piece of advice I would give on that is it's much better to do that kind of upfront, to design it in, than it is to try to go figure it out later.
On that point, like a good point here is that font size, large text is something else that people overlook this. You need to be, when you build your app, you need to go into the settings, go to the scaling factors and the large text, set them up, and see how your app reacts. And you've got to get overflows everywhere, because what you've been doing, and I tell this to everyone, don't use hard-coded sizes anywhere. Try and avoid them wherever possible. It's like going and saying, oh, my button's this high, and then the text size is twice that high, and it's going to get clicked off. You're going to be like, well, why can't I read the text? Because someone hard-coded a fixed size into the app, right? So always think about how to let things sort of expand and contract naturally, and have paddings and margins and so on to sort of push and pull and limit the size of things or so on to reach the same UI output, but to be more accessible. So for large font sizes. On that point, there's also color blindness, which is also doesn't get enough. So inside of Android developer options, you can actually set what's it called, Deuteronomy, or whatever it's called, the duo mode, or whatever it is. There's mono mode, and there's a few different color modes that you can set. And what it does is it puts your screen into a grayscale, which matches what a person would see with color blindness, and you get to experience what your app is like if you're colorblind in this certain type of way. And there's 4 or 5 in there that you can choose.
The most common in colorblindness, in fact, is red green, and so many people use red green as go stop, and it's like, no, you can't use those 2 colors. That's really wrong for that.
So like another place where red and green are used a lot is in counting. So you're showing numbers, and so you can use red for negative and green for positive if you want, but don't make that the only indications.
Yeah.
Make sure there's also a plus sign and a minus sign or whatever it is, so that people can do it. So it doesn't mean that you have to code to the the least common denominator for everybody on it, but it does mean that you need to take into account what this means to your app and come up with alternative ways to deal with it. So
I briefly cut. So here's what I was talking about. I couldn't. How do you pronounce that? Deuteronomy? Deuteronomy?
Yeah.
Can you read that? I don't know. Oops.
Yeah. Oh, enhance. Yes.
Right. Exactly. So these are the different like blue, yellow, and all these options are kind of in the settings you can choose from. Talk about accessibility. There is actually a great guide on flutter.dev, so I'll post that link in the chat for everyone. And this kind of goes through large font screen readers, sufficient contrast, so various things. But again, I like screen reading there you go. Look, here's a good example of that. You know, where it fails, perhaps. But screen readers is a nice one. So there's a widget called semantics, semantics in the tree, and that allows you to override the behavior and focus, making your own focus nodes and managing focus correctly. So you can use up, down, left, right controls to browse your application. Is also important, and you get that, you can experience that and work on that by using screen readers. So that's where that kind of comes into handy. This also means that if someone's got an external control to their product, to their device, a lot of the time they can actually use your app by using the up, down. It's called D-pad, but the up, down, left, right, enter, basically. But if you do this, you can actually turn off your screen as well. So you can actually try and use your device completely blind. But honestly, the best thing what I used to be doing quite often was to plug in a headset or Bluetooth earset, and then have the device, not even looking at the device, and try and control it just by listening to what the stuff says. But yeah, semantics widget, that's the one there. So there's a bunch of talks and content on this page you can find. There's also because my Android's going to be here briefly. So just very briefly cover this, and that is there's great stuff that other people have already done this research, and you can go go read up about this. And this is the official Android documentation. That's design and development testing and how to do sort of accessibility. So there's other aspects to this, and as we say, it's not just screen reader. Don't think it's a screen reader.
Yeah. Well, but even then, I think on that Dart page, everything about it was visual, not and it was all like your visual ability to see, like you could be like legally blind, things like that. So you make things bigger, but and even like with screen readers, in another case where this would not necessarily be intuitive for you, but your call to action button needs to be at the very beginning or at the very end, because if they're navigating through there, they can jump to the beginning or end very easy. Whereas if it's like where it would normally be on the screen, which might be right dead center or whatever, you'd have to go through a bunch of ways to get there and then come back and whatever. So you want to make sure that you've got these kind of anchors at the top and the bottom of the screen reader, so they can jump back and forth and things like that. That's what I mean by intuitive. That's not something I would necessarily have thought of if I hadn't have learned about it when researching accessibility.
Life of me, I can't remember the name of the widget, which may shock people. There is actually a widget for controlling the flow of focus. It's like
focus node. Focus
no,
node
it's like
no.
Search doesn't scroll. It kind of annoys me. Focus. I mean, it's you can set it to like column mode for focus. Yeah.
Should I ask Bard? Bard would know.
I'm gonna see if I can Google this briefly. It's failing me. It's failing me. Google is failing me. Flutter focus mode column. Come on. There is a way. There's some widgets. So basically, let's say you have a form, and you have
focus node. Is there a focus node? Is that
there is a focus node? But it's not.
Yeah,
that.
that's not it. That's
Okay.
Basically, it's a widget, and for life me.
Focus traversal policy widget.
That's the one. That's the one.
Aha! Bard. Thank you, Bard. Bard got it. It was down in the third paragraph, but it was there. All right.
Let's see if I can get this up on stream. So focus traversal group. So you can see here you've got order traversal policy, and this allows you to say if it opens, go on. You got
your browser hates you.
It does right now. So there's a bunch of these, but basically you get a lot of different policies. Where am I? Yeah, order traversal, reading order, widget order, and then there's some parameters that you can define on how you want the traversal to take place. There's lots of stuff about how to traverse your hierarchy with like up, down, left, right, and Konami codes. I had to get in there. Anyway, but this allows you to essentially. Oh, here there's a good example here. Anyway, but yeah, you basically there we go. Focus traversal group, order policy, and when you press up, down. If you want to do this, will it work? Do I have focus? No. Well, anyway, I'm sure you have a play around with it. But the point here is all of this sort of stuff does exist. Focus traversal group is the one I remember, but there are a lot of other things around this to make it work. Are the descendants focusable? Are they traversable? Things like that. And this is really great for, let's say, the example I was thinking of was where I've used it before is like having a form. Now, what you might have is, let's say, a row with multiple columns in with a form. By default, the focus wants to go left, right, top, down. But in that situation, you actually wanted to go top down on the first form. When you press next, it's like slides across in like your page view to the second form where it goes top down. So what you actually need to do is group each column as into its own traversal group and then have a different traversal on the outside. So you're changing the ordering by default about what happened to go sort of next and previous. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the framework to support you. There's documentation on that somewhere. I remember reading it a long time ago.
Well, and also when we talk about like Flutter Web, things like that, the order that you're traversing with focus matters. So you tab through things, stuff like that. So it's useful in other ways to control that. And
right.
So we have to say goodbye to our guests now. So
just
me, Simon, to wrap up the last 7 questions.
Yep. Yeah. Sorry, but got to run to a meeting. So I will.
No worries. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. We'll see you.
We'll hold the fort down. Don't worry.
Find out.
Bye.
You were heading out too, right?
I was going to head out. I can hang on for another 15 minutes or so.
Oh, great. Well, good. We have
a few more questions.
I think, yes.
Okay.
So the next question is, I restricted my app to portrait up, but the new requirement, like response to orientation, makes it easy to read PDF files on web pages. How to implement this for 2 screens here for portrait up, but not portrait up? Don't make it lock portrait up, I guess.
So you can change that orientation. I mean, if you're locking it to portrait up, so you must be locking it in the screen. So there's a system, what's it called? System Chrome is the sort of top level class in the SDK, and this has a where is it, set orientations or something, set preferred orientations, and this is what you do. This is what actually you should be using, and what this does is, let's say you're YouTube and you play a video and it goes into landscape and shows the video full screen. So what you're doing is you're just saying push the full screen play onto the stack, and when that widget gets added in its init state, it just says sets preferred to landscape only, right? And that will force the screen to be in that thing. So the user then turns their device to view it. When they hit back on dispose, you then put it back to what it was, which may be portrait only, and it will flip back. And then that's how these things are controlled. If you're talking about, you say how to implement this on 2 screens, you're talking about a dual screen device. You can do that, but I think you'll be calling out to the APIs of the platform. So John just left, and he's the expert on this. So I'm sorry.
Back at 167 hours. Oh, actually, no, we may not be here.
But what you'll find is when you do something, let's say like show dialogue, for example. You now have, it'll be the one place where it's not in here. I'm pretty sure it's here. Oh, look, traversal edge behavior. Well, that's new. I don't remember seeing that before. Controls the focus beyond the first and last items. So there's, actually, that's kind of interesting. Sorry, I just realized that could be used probably to make it so that when you get past the end of the last item, it closes the dialogue or something like that. Anyway, show general dialogue. Let me just try show general dialogue. That's it. The one time I want.
It's not a window.
I feel like I'm going blind. So there's this thing called feature on navigation, display feature. So display feature is how you can control some of the stuff about where the hinge is, and it actually also specify like you can see if it's in the flat state that's opened up, and in that side you can set your preferred orientation to landscape. I hope that helps. I'm trying to think. There's a few other things around media query and detecting dual screen. I'm assuming you mean like fold devices like this for dual screens. But I mean, there you go. yeah, I don't know. There's like when you display pop-ups and stuff. Like I've never tried. I've never had my hands. I'll be honest. I've never had my hands on a real dual screen device. It's always been virtual from the previous stuff.
You can next week.
Sorry. Oh yeah, I can next week. No, I mean, for developing for, and I'm just thinking that could you have like a landscape one the other two screens have one in landscape mode and one in portrait mode? Like I don't think like
it's going to cut it. No, I mean, yeah, you can, but it's going to cut it down. It's going to crop, or it's going to zoom. Either way.
No, what I'm trying to say is like imagine the content. So like if you put your phone in landscape mode, you have to move your phone around, right? Yeah. So having one of those two screens in landscape, so it's actually you turn it to see it, and one in portrait. I don't know why you would want to do that, but I don't. I mean, they give you all the flexibility in the API. That the underlying, at least the Android API is really flexible. Gives you full control over doing all this stuff, and we've had great support from John and Microsoft in adding support for that for their dual screen devices. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. All right, next.
Oh, yeah. Some more.
Mytho. Between building for Flutter web versus desktop, which factors do you keep in mind that help you decide?
All right. Well, this at least has something to do with web, so I'm going to jump in.
Yes.
When I look at something like this, I mean, that's pretty much anything you're going to do on web, you're going to do on desktop. I mean, obviously, if there's plugins that are only available on one and not the other, then that decides it for you. But in general, when I'm looking at it, I mean, the big thing for me is, how is someone going to get your app in the first place? If I build it for desktop, they're going to have to install it, and that's going to, it can be approved through the Apple Store or whatever. There's things, or I'm sure Microsoft Store would approve our app too. So we can definitely do stuff like that, or you got to have a way of installing it without that, which we've all, seen, I think, with certain things. So that's one way. It might, otherwise a web app works really well. And that's what we do with ours. And that's the reason why ours is a web app instead of a phone app or a desktop app, is because people, where I'm working with is helping people fill out basically mortgage applications. And so that's not something you do very often. So you don't want to install an app to do that. This is something I'm going to do, pretty infrequently. And so, a web app is the right kind of approach for that. So you get the same behavior, but you just click on a link and it pulls it up. And that works, works on phone or on the desktop. So I'm not totally understanding the question here, but the first thing I would look at is just make sure that all the plugins I want to do work on, if they only work on one of them, then that's easy. If to get what I need is only gonna, we're talking about sensors earlier. And if my plugin for sensors only works on web, doesn't work on desktop, then I'm going to use it on web. That answers the question. But otherwise, that would really be my thing, is how, what is it? Is it like Slack, where someone's going to be running it all the time? And so in that case, an app makes a lot of sense. Great, let's build an app. They can install it on their machine. Or is it something that is more like, I'm going to a web page or something, and I can do that. And you can install a progressive web app anyway. So we have the manifest.json. We talked about that a few weeks ago. We've got the ability to make that work too. So I don't know what else you want to add.
One of the main concerns is also things like, does it need local file system access? Because a web app cannot do that. And so you definitely have some limitations, because it can do it to a very limited degree, but yeah.
So you can store things locally, like they have a thing called local storage, which is accessible through Dart. But it's not the same as like just reading any file off the hard drive or anything like that.
Yeah. Definitely not. You end up having to have the user involved doing drag and drop or file name selection or saving their download.
To be honest, just to cover that point about the file access, all your Flutter apps are deployed as universal Windows binaries if they're on Windows, and on Mac they're in the sandboxed environment, which basically means you actually still don't have full access to the system. You need to have request access. There's a permission system you need to implement. They're taking that model, a sandbox model, from mobile, essentially, because most people don't realize when they store an app on their desktop, it has full access to everything on your desktop, pretty much. So yeah.
I am finding that more and more irritating as I'm installing more and more apps on my, the later and later Mac OS versions, is that it's like now anyone wants to be able to access the downloads file. Why? It used to be able to do that all on its own. Why does it need me to get involved again? So now it's like all these questions come up, like, but you can about your desktop. Can you access your desktop? Okay, yes. I just want to keep saying yes to everything, please.
The whole storage, the whole way that we deal with storage, for years on computers has just been turned on its head in most recent years. Yeah. And it's an interesting problem because exactly like that, like you say yes, and you're giving now access to all your downloads to the application essentially, right? When really truthfully you just want to say you can store stuff in my downloads folder, right? But most people don't know that there's a difference between those things, right? So there's a fine-grained control that is needed, but also there's a level of, it's the same with like asking users for permissions. There's a whole thing around permission models where you want to give them a reason beforehand to say, we're asking for the permission because we need to do this, right? So that they're not just going to go deny, right? And mess up. And they go, why doesn't your app work? Well, it's because you denied the permission, right? So it's a different dynamic now, right? But it's interesting.
And then in mobile, it's a lot weirder because you've got all these varying levels of access. Like people will say, well, how do I show a downloaded file to my user? And it's like, well, where was it downloaded to? And was it the app, the temporary? Yeah. If you look at Path Provider, you see like 9 different names. It's something like 9. It's probably like 4, but it's 9 different names for all the different places things have different permissions for, and they're differing up even on desktop now. Or like somebody will say, I want my app to access my photos. Oh, you've got to jump through hoops for that. You can't just access a photo. Even if you just downloaded the photo, you can't necessarily access it as a photo. So it's like pretty crazy stuff.
You're not far off, Randall. 8.
Pretty darn close. 8 is enough.
So, yeah, but it does actually say like path to where your application may store data that user generated, or that cannot otherwise be recreated by your application, where the application can place support files. And it does actually say use this file. You don't use this for files you don't want to expose to your user, right?
Yeah.
Your app should not use the directory for user data. Your app should not use this for user data files. Basically, maybe settings, right? But there's also actually another directory here, which library directory, which is also the one that's persisted and backup. And the whole idea of this is that if there's local data that you want to persist with the user, so if they uninstall your app or reinstall it, or let's say they get a new phone and then they transfer the app across, that data is what's kept, so the user stays logged in, for example, right? Like that's all stuff you need to think about. Yeah. Anyway.
And people get that wrong, and then I get a new phone, and I got to redo half of my logins and stuff. It's really annoying. So it works that way. But yeah, and then you get people in the Discord and in all the other places people ask questions that say, my app got rejected because I requested access to external media. I don't understand. This works fine on my system. Yeah, because it doesn't actually pay attention to that privilege on your system.
It's also like you're running in developer mode, right? Like it's like, oh, you've been allowed, right?
Yeah.
The other one is the other thing is like you forget, a lot of times you're developing and you're working like maybe the most recent version, and you haven't done a fresh install or fresh use of your server of your app, right? So you don't know what that initial experience is. Like you've already said yes to these permissions, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Well,
it could definitely be different.
Then we got a question coming up a couple down that is about how permissions, the results because of permissions changing with different versions of the OS. So we go.
Let's crack on. Let's crack on. Let's do that.
Where's
this one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's right here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the question, of course, is what could be the problem if the notifications are showing up on Android 12 and lower, but they don't show up on Android 13? And very specifically,
clearly the number 13 is the.
It is number 13. Yeah, it actually is. In this case, because permissions for these messages are something that changed on 13 to be an opt-in instead of an opt-out. So there's a change for what happened, And so very specifically now, you got to go request that permission on Android if you want to be able to get the notifications coming in.
And there is actually a function already that does that in the Firebase messaging package, because it's a requirement on iOS and it's now implemented on Android in the latest version of Firebase messaging. So inside Firebase messaging, let's see if I can bring it up on the screen here. Firebase messaging, where is it? There's a function here saying request permission. There you go. Apparently return a value of in authorization status indicating the app has been notifications enabled or blocked.
Right.
So yeah, requesting what sort of like alerts you want to do. But yeah, this is the standard practice way of doing it. I mean, in the case where something doesn't work on a particular platform, what I do is I go look at the release notes of that platform, the developer release notes. So if I can find it, which I'm not, let's see if I can find 13 here. Of course, the one place I want to look and it's not popping up. Oh, here we go. Let me bring this up on stream. So I just searched Android 13 on developer.android.com. Up it comes. What's new? Behavioral changes, new APIs and features. And what they'll do in here is indicate like what you need to do to behavioral changes here for all apps. What's changed? Things like task manager, I know battery utilization. What you might need to change to adhere or to deal with the latest stuff. And normally, these don't come into play unless you set targets. So inside your Android Gradle file, you'll see that you have a target Android version. That's the version that you're saying, I know I support this version, right? It's not your minimum version, but you're saying I can support this version. And that's what it says here. Android's targeting 13 or higher. And here are the behavioral changes. Notification permissions affects foreground service appearance. If the user denies notification permissions, they don't see related foreground notifications, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So these are all those sort of granular changes that might have taken place that you might need to have to deal with. And naturally, like this is very similar to like how you might have breaking changes in Flutter that you have to change, right? You just need to deal with them. And frankly, you know, you're at the behest of the operating system always, right? So you have to deal with it.
And our last question actually kind of relates to that whole bit.
What's that?
The last question we've got, which is not, I mean, we've still got a few more to go, but the last one is, we've got on there relates specific to what you just said there, which is how do we?
We'll do them out of order. Why not? Go on.
Sorry about that. I'm just kind of telling the story based on what we're talking about here.
Yeah. You know, how future-proof do you make your Flutter apps? Any specific, especially to ensure Flutter SDK releases don't break the current app. Always use the most recent stable. Yeah. There you go. When new stable comes out every quarter, update. Make sure you should be doing consistent updates of all your dependencies, reviewing all your dependencies, change logs. You should just be sinking if you're running your own app, stick it in the diary. This time every week or every month, I spend an hour doing this, right? And this way you can really keep ahead. If you don't, what happens is your app gets further and further out of date. And to make that leap from really old to really new is literally like impossible. You spend weeks.
Much harder.
Whereas if you just spend a little bit of time here, a little bit of time there, new version. Okay, they've changed that parameter name or they've made that breaking change. Or now I have to do request permissions. You just do this trickle of changes along the way. It's so much easier. Your
bookmark list should include at least the breaking changes pages for both Dart and Flutter. But there's also the language evolution pages for that stuff. There's also the language funnel if you want to look at sort of the fundamental changes to the Dart language. But I have like a dozen of these bookmarked because I'm looking at these almost every day to make sure that they're not sneaking new things in on me. And it's like, if you weren't watching those, you probably missed Isolate Run, which is an amazingly cool technology that most people don't even are aware of. But it was mentioned in the 2.19 release notes. And I went, oh my goodness, this solves a problem that I've had for a long time. And we have to do I've actually done screencasts on it. So I'll put my screencast link in the channel. Link. There we go.
So that's the official breaking changes. There's also an official release notes page. That's that one. And then finally, the language evolution one is another one to especially now be with sort of switching to Dart 3. That's the other sort of page. But yeah, all these things are accessible. So.
And the one thing I would just say that you get pretty much for free is, first off, you should be running a linter. The linter, you should be paying attention to what shows up on that. And one of the things that you definitely don't want to let slide at all is when you see deprecation notices, because that's telling you it's going to break soon. That's telling you they're going to break you soon. They're giving you a warning. They're giving you a chance to do it kind of gracefully on your own terms. So those will show up in your linter, and make sure you pay attention to them. And don't, I actually had.
Don't worry about deprecations.
I was upgrading, an app, and all of a sudden, and I make all the changes for the deprecations and stuff like that. And it turns out that it broke some stuff when it went to build for real. And I'm like, what's going on here? Ooh. And someone had actually turned off the linter warning for the deprecation.
No.
Yes.
Oh, evil. You must.
For sure. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me here. So yeah, I missed making a couple of these changes that needed to be done because someone had turned off the linter warning. Don't do that.
Speaking of linter warning, I'm a big fan of very good analysis from the VGB people. I'm using that everywhere, and it is definitely my preferred set and kept up to date of lints. So check those out. Very good analysis.
There's definitely I feel like I used to run my own set, and I haven't updated it some time, so maybe I should do my own little package, because there's a whole set of rules that I prefer. Like, it's kind of interesting, right? Like something that came up, this is on, I think it was on Twitter the other day, which was async. I think it's like, don't return hang on, I'm gonna find the link to page here, because
async people have a weight boundary.
No.
I do have to go. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks for joining us. No, of course. It's wonderful having you. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. I'll see you all. I guess we're not having a show next week?
No, we're having it live. We're going to try live from the event. So
all right, I'll be there for that.
Exciting.
See you all then.
See you then.
Right.
I'm going to see if I can find that there's. Why does the official Flutter lints package not link to the list of lints?
I know. Oh, that's annoying. Let's file an issue. Let's file a bunch of issues.
You need to file like I just realized that I want to get to the list, and it should just be there. And I'm like, what?
I always find it like creating a lint trigger in an app, and then clicking on the link that's there, and then it takes you right to the lint pages.
Apparently, there's a lint rules. So on the lints package, which is the underlying Dart package, there's lint rules, which has got a new page. So now there's a new page with all the linter rules in. But there's actually all linter rules. Oh no, I lie. Oh no, all linter rules. I don't know. There's all the linter rules that are available. Anyway, so there's one here about weight only futures. That's really, I think that's the one that's good to have on. Hang on a minute. Yeah, so you always have to await futures, and there's an unawaited function that you wrap with if you want to exclude it specifically. Unawaited futures, that's the one. Sorry, which means that you mark it as unawaited if you're not using it. But unnecessary await and return. So this is kind of an interesting scenario that people do this. People do this here. Now, this is bad and good. This is just what the linter recognizes. I'm not suggesting that this is good. Now, there's reasons to do it. However, it's very slim. In my humble opinion, I am a HO, right? Because what happens here is it calls this function, and because it returns this future, if there was a crash or exception, this function is no longer in the stack trace because it's not running anymore. You've skipped this function by doing this. Where if you async and await, F1 is actually being called. Now, if it's simple like this, maybe don't, right? Like maybe you can return because it's just a pass-through, right? However, a lot of the time, if there's any logic in this function, you definitely should have async. You should have your async and await, right? That's for certain.
In particular, if you're inside a try-catch block, you need to do the await inside the try.
Yes.
If you don't do the await there, you slip out of the try-catch, and then your exception happens, and boom, you end up in the wrong part of dark, deep memory.
But yeah, there's so many like options and things that you can enable. And as we said, very good analysis is an option. There's Flutter lint, there's a lot of them. Go through and pick the ones you want to add to your own. Like just extend your own one, right? There was one that I don't know if even in here. I kind of want to see now. So look at this. Look, use decorated box has fixed. Use colored box.
Right.
I didn't know they actually had fixed. They got fixes for this. Oh,
yes, those are constable, and it's great because a decorated box, as opposed to using a container, a decorated box or a colored box is constable. I love that word.
I honestly have not looked at these because these weren't there last time I looked, and these are already really old now. I actually need to go back through these myself. But there was what's the one that you async await boundary, whatever it is. Await. Find it here.
Like
a context, isn't it? Like
using that's it. Experimental.
Do you not use async across async? Well, it says experimental, but this is the one that's actually set by default in Flutter lints, and this one catches a lot of people out as well. So if you look here, we wait for 1 second. So this button taps, we wait for 1 second, then we call navigate context pop. The problem here is during this 1 second, the widget might have got removed from the tree. They press back, right? Cool. So now the context is no longer valid. It's no longer attached, and it will crash here, right? So what they're saying is either call it up front, or perhaps you should be checking if the context is mounted beforehand and ignoring it. Or another thing is you could actually, let's say you're depending on something from a provider or Riverpod. You can get that up front before your await and then use it in the function after the await has been finished. But this also catches people out when you use widget. It's another quite common practice. People use widget.value after an await, but the widget might have got reloaded on the screen with different parameters. And at that point, if you're using a mix of maybe the original parameters to start your asynchronous process and the new parameters to your new configuration for your widget after the await has taken place. So, be cautious of when you're using getters, basically, as well. So basically, as soon as you have an await, everything you need after that await should be captured in the local scope, ideally. For sure, but generally that's what you want to look at. Anyway,
and Simon, I don't know if you agreed with this, but I'm of the mind that using widget dot anything after init state is probably a code smell, because if you're using it down in build, it might already be some different value from having your code reassigned to a new widget. Or if you're using it in these callbacks, same problem. So I think you should only be using widget dot in init state to copy some things over to your state that came in as.
I'm okay with it being used in build, because the idea here is that imagine your widget gets rebuilt, and then you just use the new values, right? That's not a problem. I think the key here is that if you start up any third-party process off of like a side effect, you need to make sure you update that side effect. So a good example here is, let's say you're listening to a stream, and that stream is based on the parameters of your widget. Let's say like the user ID, and you listen to the user. Then what's going to happen here is to in your init state, you say, okay, get the widget user, look up that stream, and store that like the stream subscription locally. There's a function called did update widget, and did update widget is specifically there to solve this problem. You go in there, you go old widget, user ID is different from the new widget's ID, or just widget ID. Then you cancel that stream subscription, you start a new one because the ID has changed. And that's how you work out the side effects of your widget configuration changing. Whereas if you're in the build, because build always runs on a widget configuration change, then it's not really a problem.
Yeah, there are quite a few states, or quite a few lifecycle states to a state object that you really ought to get familiar with and don't get talked about nearly enough. And Craig Lebenz did this wonderful thing at Vikings last year that was just really worth watching. Everybody should sit down and watch that. Craig Lebenz, lifecycle of a widget. You can find it. Vikings, and then you probably find it easily.
Yeah, Flutter Vikings. Yeah, I think there's some. I feel like there's some. I think he did some YouTube videos around that.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so much content. I literally just Googled it. There's so much content. So just go find it if you're interested.
Right.
All right.
Cool.
See what else we've got here. What's this? Hey, what's this? Packer said, there might be a reason why I can't create a loop on tap. on a pin pad inside a test. Yeah.
It was what you were just talking about, and he
maybe yeah. Oh yeah, and then again, a little comment here: do not return function. Do not return future on async function. Yeah, like if it's already the point here is that if you marked a function as async, it's already a future. So there's no need to return a future, right? So just return the value, right? That's another one, and there is actually lint checks for that as well. All right, let's get back to the final question. So sorry, we skipped a few. We're going to go back in time.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Donnelly said, as someone who just found Dart and Flutter, I think you have an amazing tool. Awesome, thank you.
Yay! However, I have an amazing tool.
However, I noticed that Flutter feels and looks like it has a high learning curve. Is there a way to combine this tool? I'm going to tell you right now. I tell you what now. I want Jeremiah. If you're still around, I want you to post if you have any previous experience with any other mobile dev platforms, right? Any other, because frankly, from my previous experience with all these things, Flutter is the simplest, and I think it can be a bit confusing for people that are coming from a imperative style based UI. So that's like you build up your hierarchy of widgets. So this is very much like HTML, where you kind of like define it up front, to where it's a declarative approach, which is what Flutter uses, and that's because it's React. The idea is you have your UI react to the data, which is so much better, because it means that your state of your application mirrors the state of your UI, and they never two get out of sync. So many bugs in user experience and UI on a lot of apps is because of that one factor, that the state gets changed and the UI doesn't get rebuilt. So imagine you got a tick box, and one part of your app says, okay, you should no longer have that. It uses, I don't know, it's no longer got this permission or something, and the tick goes off. You set the flag to false, but the UI doesn't change. So the user was looking at it, and the tick is still there in the box. And they go, "Oh, he's still got it enabled." Right? That's just such a simple idea there. It's such a simple premise. But if you have it so that your user objects can be streamed or listened to or whatever else, and then your UI rebuilds if that model changes, now suddenly, whenever that flag gets changed by any part of your application, that tick box also changes. And that is the difference. What the user sees is what the state is, and the two are married together. And you don't have to do that, but it's definitely the way that Flutter's been designed.
Yeah.
But is there a way to combat this for new? So talking about the high learning curve, there is actually a great. I'm going to see if I can find the link here. So it's called the highly subjective roadmap to Flutter. And I bring this up. It's a repo. The link is in the chat by Alexander Lechensky. Lechensky, sorry. And here he goes through what are the different things you should learn and various other things, taking you to like a whole sort of user journey. And then there's lots of resources from here to things you should check out and learn. There's also Awesome Flutter. If I find that here, Awesome Flutter is another resource by our good friend Robert Felker, who we should get on the stream. It's been a while. Robert, I haven't spoken to him in a while. Robert started collating awesome Flutter things. So these are things in Flutter, like videos, articles, all sorts of things that are awesome. And again, this can help you kind of like direct you to content and people and other information online, which can help you maybe solve some of your problems.
I like this side comment from another person in the chat.
Try developing using Java and XML, and then tell me if Flutter has a high learning curve. Yeah. I mean, do you remember XAML? XAML was a thing that Microsoft.
No, I got to avoid that. But I've heard stories about it. Actually, anytime XML is involved, if XML is the answer, you've asked the wrong question. That's all.
I could hurt everyone's minds if you go look up SOAP XML.
Ow! Please make him stop, Daddy. Make him stop.
So that was a system of RPC, remote procedure call, over XML, and get this, all the banks still use it.
Now, and I've mentioned this on the show before, I was on a project for a while
that used an XML encoding layer and then ran SOAP over the top of that. So it was SOAP double encoded XML for the lowest layer stuff, single encoded for the middle layer stuff. And then
sometimes I look. Sometimes I mean, the thing is, the solution. This is it. This is
so happy. Can we just erase? Can we use some SOAP on that page?
RPC 1990. Oh God, text me back. Stable like the stable release is still like 60 years old. Is the stable release? Oh dear. Now the thing is, like the principles behind it and everything else, like, was nice, but it had so much. Like, this is it. Like, look, in stock envelope, you had to have a header, then the body, and then you had your function get stock price, then you had your stock name. It's like all this, like there's so much descriptive. I mean, this is the thing. This is XML. It's a markup language. There's so much descriptive over sort of extra that you have to do to just describe a structure.
But you had to learn quickly about XML namespaces too, and how to namespace prefixes on individual items, because there were two things both called begin. One in the SOAP namespace and one in the RPC namespace. Yes.
So it's painful. I mean, here's the thing, right? There's a reason for it, and the reason for it was, well, first of all, with the new protocols that were binary, right? So XML, and at that time, XML and JSON were like head to head. And I think there still are. There's use cases for both. And XML covers HTML as well in a certain degree, right? But they've been head-to-head. And JSON has kind of pulled ahead in the space of APIs and communication. There's proto-buffers. There's all sorts of other ways of communicating your intent across a channel. But XML has its uses, and one of them was doing things like extensible. So was it XSLT? Which was it was a transition language.
XML, you can basically transition transformations written in XML.
Yes.
Namespaces again. Yeah, this is the namespace of the data I'm manipulating. This is the namespace of my meta controls for that. Ooh.
There's so many headaches from XML namespaces. I don't know, but the principles were necessarily like about the fact that you can define a schema and you can ensure the data meets that schema by validating it. And that is a perfectly reasonable idea. It's just like they didn't you can't handwrite any of that stuff. You end up having to like build like a whole piece of code around like linking objects together and doing all this stuff to generate your document to then ship it over channel. It's like so much overhead to just send a request. So there's now there's JSON RPC, and there's also there's several validation standards for JSON as well. I'm trying to remember. JSON, is it JSON LD? No, that's what they are.
You can also do XML really wrong. Oh yeah, JSON schema, right? You can do XML really wrong. Apple's plist is a perfect example of that.
Oh God,
plist, Simon. Apparently, you said the right response. A plist takes one XML element and then the following adjacent XML element for key and value. It can all be one thing. It shouldn't be two separate things.
It's not even that. It's not even that. It's like you can put them out of order and screw everything up. And it's like, that's literally the point of XML, that you can put them in different orders and not have this problem. And they're just like, fuck it. They're just like,
plist. I spit in your general direction. Yes, right.
So I just want briefly to show this up. So I just did a quick Google. Yes, a JSON schema. There's lots of validation libraries, as you can see here, lots of different ones, different languages. But basically, it's like this: you basically describe your JSON object in JSON, of course, right? Yeah. And as you can see here, it's using this schema. This thing at the top here is tantamount to namespaces, is what we were just talking about with XML. But this basically says, this is the version of the schema that I adhere to in this document. Here's the title, description, and type of what this is, followed by these properties and so on and so forth. And you can which parameters are required, which are optional. And this essentially means that you write out your schema for your API, and then you can then say, as a let's say the body of your request comes in, you say, does it validate against the schema? No, reject it. right? You don't have to even like try and pass the object or anything. The JSON schema passing piece does that for you. So there's reasons to use these things. Anyway, we're completely off topic here, as we have other questions.
We should wrap up pretty quick here.
Yeah. We'll get to the end of the show shortly. What was I saying? As someone I just found. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. We answered that one. All right, next question. That was the notification and permission piece that someone has answered. All right.
Oh, this was nice.
What's the difference or relationship between failure, error, exception? Which do you throw or return? I think I know it, but I don't know or understand it. Please help clarify. Now, I'm gonna give. So first of all, failure is FP Dart, right? Like that's not part of. That's not part of the Flutter. It's not part of Flutter.
Actually, no, it's not part of FP Dart either. That would be the either type. You can use any type you want for failure and success. So it doesn't. It's not specific.
I feel like it had.
There's a result class in the async library that might have failure as a hardwired name, but FP Dart.
Have a quick look and see if I can load it up. But anyway, so when it comes to errors, so I'm going to bring up the documentation because it's just easier. Here, error. Here's the error class. An error represents a program failure that the programmer should have avoided. Right? So this is structurally you've done the wrong thing, right? Like this is not an exception. An exception is something that you can recover from. An error is something that you cannot recover from. It is a program failure. So this is things like, and I think there's some built-in. So we could say, what is it, indexed error or whatever? Yeah, index error. For example, really nice if I can find. Oh, yeah, argument error. So, error. There should be a set of classes in here somewhere. There you go. Argument error, assertion error, async error, JSON unsupported object error, no such methodic error, out of memory error. So these are all like you can make your own up if you feel that you need it, but state error is quite a common one that's used. But this is, you're not allowed this current state. This should never happen. It's the unsupported error. It's quite a common one. Like you're trying to do something that's unsupported. Now, if you've got a case, this a good example is this. You've got again, people do this, and it does infuriate. Well, it's mildly infuriating for me when I see it. But that is like you see a switch statement, and they add in a default which returns like a blank string or a null or something like that. But the default value is never used. It's there to complete and to get rid of like your lint check, right? What you need to be doing there is throwing unsupported error, right? Which is saying that you should never get to a state where this enum or whatever you're checking should be in this state. If it's like, don't return a default value. And returning the default value is saying, you might need a case we need to do that, right? But my point being is that a lot of the time people do this, and they're doing it because they want to they just carry on going, you know. But the point here is that it should never occur, and if it should never occur, you need to say that. And that's kind of like essentially you could say unsupported, or there's an unimplemented as well. Unimplemented error is more about it's not been implemented yet, whereas unsupported is I don't support this, right?
This is the one that's used by a lot of code snippets where they're laying out a skeleton of code that you're supposed to go in and fill, and they'll just put the body as return unimplemented error as being like, well, this is because the programmer forgot to finish this template. So
this is unfinished code. But if the class is not intended to implement this feature, it should throw an unsupported error. And the idea of error is they're not meant to be recoverable. We don't catch an error, right? But here's the funny thing about this. We call the catch. So when you do a catch, try catch or something like that, the first parameter is called error. and this is about terminology. And sadly, this is about terminology. It should really be exception. However, errors are thrown. So this is where I think the confusion of David comes to, which is errors and exceptions are treated almost synonymously in terms of language inside your application, but errors themselves are failures that are not recoverable, right? So this is the same as like, where is it? There's concurrent modification. There's a bunch of these. There's I'm trying to find it. Was it argument error? Index error.
That's not an argument. That's just a disagreement.
Oh, dear. So here's an example here where you try and access an index that's not in the range of the object, right? Well, you should never do that. That is an error, right? That's an error of the programmer, right? That's not an exception, right? In case you should have an if statement or some other condition that says, oh, if it's out of the range, I do something for that reason, because it should never be out of range in the first place. In that case, it's something the programmer should handle.
It's like my favorite one of those is null check on a null error. People post to Stack Overflow and say, I just got this. Why did I get this? It's because they used exclamation, which is a promise that that's never going to be null. And it was null. You broke your promise. The problem is you in your chair. Fix it. Don't, if that could sometimes be null, take a code path for it. Don't just say it'll never be null.
So, and
this dramatic reading brought to you by Randall Schwartz and Black Sleep.
True, right? Coming back to this, there's also exception, and this is the difference. So it is a marker interface. So it just marks an object as being an exception, right? And this is to convey information to the user about a failure, so they can be so the error can be addressed programmatically. It is intended to be caught and to contain useful data fields. So the very basic exception you do is exception message, and the message is something, but it's discouraged, as it says here, because it doesn't give you any information about what the error is. There's no, like, I see this too often, like people put codes in their exceptions, and then I've seen people do like greps and things on the error messages to get out the code. It's like, well, define an object with your code as a parameter. Jesus, right?
Yeah.
But here you'll see here, like, format exception, like this will be thrown when you're trying to pass an integer and it's got a text in it, for example, and it'll throw this and it'll tell you what the source was and where in that string the exception occurred. And these are the practical reasons for having this. So when this occurs, you can tell the user, oh, in fact, you can actually highlight that character in your UI and say, look, it's wrong, you should delete this. You know, you could do things with exceptions, right? So that's kind of that kind of sort of completes the difference between the two, I guess. There is there's a bunch of inbuilt. We just said exception here, but there's a bunch of inbuilt exceptions for all sorts of things, right? So quite a common one are IO exceptions, and you can see here like HTTP file system standard in, standard out, TLS, WebSocket, socket exception. These are all the common ones, and these occur very often in mobile apps. And it occurs when the person goes out of range of their cell tower, right? They go out of range, they got a bad signal, and that's it. The socket connection that you're receiving that lovely image on gets cut short. And then suddenly, that's it. What does your app do? It throws an exception, IO exception. I didn't get all the data I was expecting. Something went wrong. And you as the programmer need to be dealing with that and saying, oh, there's a little error symbol, retry, something like that, if you want to handle it. But generally speaking, these, as I said, are recoverable, right? Now, people do name their classes error, and if you have an exception that you're throwing, you should definitely say implements exception. It's a marker class so that people know it's an exception. You can also say on exception in your catch statement to say, I only want to handle exceptions. There is various other exception classes in Flutter. I'm trying to think of some of the common ones, but I can't think of any right in a second. And this list doesn't scroll. Look, see, I'll press enter. Wait a minute. That was not there the other day, I swear. Oh,
yeah, it's been there for a few days. I've seen it before.
It's calling me a lie. Right, anyway. Yeah, handshake, DOM, path exception from the path library, the async timeout exception. If you do that, deferred load exception, like there's a bunch of them. And a function, if you declare a function like an async function that can throw an exception, state in the doc comment, that's 3 slashes above your function, what it can throw, so that you understand when you're looking around your code what could possibly happen. Now, any exception can happen in any future, right? Any place in your code, an exception can happen, but you should handle it gracefully. So a common one that most people see is platform exception in Flutter. That's when a plugin throws an error and it comes down to the app. Missing plugin exception, another one where you're trying to access a plugin that doesn't exist on your particular platform, for example. Or you haven't restarted your app after adding a plugin package. That happens as well. But yeah, so there's a bunch of them, and I'm sure you can find some interesting things. Now, coming back to the point here, another thing is which do you throw or return? I think we've gone into that. Hopefully that's clarified something and I didn't just confuse you, David. There is another thing. You can throw any object. It does not have to be an exception. It does not have to implement exception. It does not have to be an error. It does not have to extend an error. You can just make any class and throw it. Right? But that's why you might have to have your own like way of handling exceptions, right? You might have your own like stack of inheritance and classes. There might be some magical things that you want to do. And I really like this about Dart is that you can throw anything. If you want to throw a string, you can throw a string. I wouldn't suggest you do that, or an integer, or some primitive type.
I've been known in a quick case to just write throw quote up quote throw up. Yeah. We have an exception here. I don't care. Something that's broken.
But yeah, it should indicate exactly what went wrong, essentially what went wrong and how you can recover from it. So a good example may be, this happens quite often actually. You're using a REST API and you get back a non-200 response. Let's say you get back 401 unauthorized, which is basically your tokens expired, right? Or whatever it is, your API token, whatever. So in which case, you want to handle that, right? Now, there could be a graceful way of handling that. That might be that you've already got like a refresh token and you want to get a new user token and then remake the request. And you could do that because if you get the 401 at the top level, you can throw it, catch it further in the function that called it, then go off, get the token, do your while loop or whatever, and make the request again with a new token. Or log the user out and say, look, the app's going to log that state, that's it, you have to log back in again. But there's ways of handling these things gracefully. Don't just catch all exceptions and just ignore them. Don't ever do that either.
Oh, yeah, never.
I see that way too much as well.
Yeah, don't just catch and print. I guess you can do that initially in development, but you definitely don't want to do that in production. That's just silly. You should do something with the error if you're going to catch it. But always, as you were saying earlier, always restrict the catches to the things you're willing to handle. Let the rest bubble up. And speaking of bubbling up, let's start wrapping it up. I think we're done.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a quick look through here. There's been some chatting. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Using some big banks. I remember it well.
OS2, half an operating system. Yes.
James, the Dash plushies, I'm afraid, are not accessible right now. They're very limited in supply. I gave away all my. These are actually the original. These are the larger ones. They have mini ones. This is the same size as we notice how big this one is compared to.
It's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell on the camera, but there is a definite.
It can be really big.
I'm gonna say the reason I kept both of these. If you notice here, light here, dark here.
Yes.
So they did two versions, and that's the original one. They don't do that anymore.
You're opening the Dash Museum. Yes.
But the best thing I'd say is contribute to the community, go to Flutter events, and a plushie will make its way magically into your hands at some point, I'm sure.
Indeed. All right. Well, we ran an hour over our 1 hour target.
Let's go. Yeah, let's quickly just briefly go for the chat here. Yeah, thank you, Christian. Yeah, I think it was around that sort of time. I remember it around that sort of time. I mean, JavaScript was around at that time. I don't remember when JSON came out, and it started getting traction. I don't know. They were all around the same sort of time. Because, I mean, it was HTML and JavaScript, right? And then did XML exist as a standard before HTML? I don't remember.
For Ajax. Remember Ajax? The X in Ajax is XML.
Yeah. Yes.
So we call it XHR now, but it used to be called Ajax.
I remember Ajax.
Go get an XML payload to do a dynamic update of a portion of your web page. That's the whole reason that we can do browser activity. Yes, XML.
You just reminded me of DHTML. Do you remember dynamic HTML? DHTML?
Yeah.
That was like back in the front page 2000 days. Blimey.
Yeah.
That's like 23 years ago. Jesus.
Somebody brought up Dreamweaver the other day, and I just about freaked out. Dreamweaver. It's been so long since I've heard that word that I was getting. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's interesting. TOML, YAML are basically if I remember rightly, are like one-to-one compatible with JSON in some way. You can convert between them. It's kind of cool.
They're not complete in either direction.
No.
Toml has some very limited ways it can do nested data structures. YAML, however, has a larger set of things that JSON can do. So you can convert every JSON instantly into YAML because, in fact, it's a proper subset. JSON is a proper subset of YAML. You could take any JSON structure, drop it into a file that ends in YAML, and have it read by a YAML processor just fine. I've done that before with my pubspec.yaml. I've converted it to JSON and then dropped it in there, and it works just fine. So yeah.
Looks like I don't have the code. I don't have the. So someone said, Niels. Hey, Niels. Said there's only a few days until Fluttercon, which yay, great thing. Can't wait. So we'll get that, add that up on screen again. It's fluttercon.dev for those people that don't know, and it's next Wednesday to Friday in Berlin. So come join us. Come find us. A bunch of us will be there. Myself, Niels, Danielle, a bunch of people from the community. You won't want to miss that one out.
I'll be reporting on it remotely from my secret underground bunker in Portland, Oregon.
Indeed. I saw that there was. I know these aren't like these questions came in late, but they're the only two questions I want to answer now because we've wrapped up the show. Is there a way to use future weight without casting them to then? Is there a way to future without casting or using then? So there is now, and this is a new feature that you showed me this the other day, actually, Randall. This is
record weight. Record
it's
weight.
A record. Yes. Use what's it called? Would you remember what it's called now?
It doesn't really have a name. It's an extension on record, which is a type that isn't really a type. It's really weird. You can look up in the API record, and there it is future 2. So future 2.
Future. There's future.
All the way up to 9. So record 2 to record 9.
So down here you'll find there's future record 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and basically this means that you can add in your 3 specific futures and types, and then wait for them. And so this is an extension method, and it does all the type safety and magical stuff for you. And essentially, it's the same as doing you make a record and then do wait on it. So it's a getter on a record, right? And it means that you can keep your type safety without having to cast, like you're saying here, list user, list category, so on. You can do that with exactly that. So look at records. This is a new feature in Dart 3. You have to be using Dart 3, but hopefully that answers your question. Quickly, how can I utilize platform-specific features such as camera contacts in Flutter without applying third-party libraries, while ensuring that the required permissions are handled properly? So you could just make your own Java code, right? So you can just, inside your app, go into the address folder, add your Java code, make a method channel, and call it from your Flutter code. It means you don't require any third-party libraries, but then you still have to code that stuff yourself, right?
Yeah, because when you say you can do this, you're presuming the person that you're talking to can do this.
Yes,
somebody can probably do it. You might need to hire them.
No, but what I'm trying to say is any app built this way can actually, use a method channel. And it's there is documentation on the Flutter website for writing platform-specific code, which I'll see if I can get briefly if it loads.
This is for you, Simon, as well.
I will take a look in just a second. Write platform-specific code when it loads. And yes, I'll post this in the chat. So this is the platform-specific code page. It talks about how the channels work. But yeah, you can just I think there's an example in here. But to be honest, you don't have to write a package or anything else. There you go. Inside your main activity in your Flutter project, you can, inside the configure Flutter engine function, you can just create a method channel with whatever channel name you want and handle your code. And then inside your Dart code, there's a good example of a handler. I think describe it here. Here you go. Look, method channel. If it's this method, call this function, whatever you want. And inside your Dart code, you just call to that method channel, which I'm sure is down here somewhere. I won't go into it, but it's all on documents on the page that will get you to the area you're looking for. But again, do you want to? I mean, Flutter is a UI toolkit that works on top of the operating system. It doesn't have features for camera, contacts, things like that built in. There is a lovely camera package, and that's a first-party package made by the Flutter team, which I recommend you use because doing things like video and audio is not simple, right? So don't kid yourself. You're going to make that yourself, but you could. I mean, they did. So
somebody.
All right. Oh, that's the end of that. So and Christian said, "Can I watch next Humpday live at Fluttercon? Also, is there still an offer for a dash? Let's see if we can find it. I don't remember one, but I'll see if I can get you one. I think there's going to be some dashes available at the event. I'm not going to don't quote me on that because I don't know for sure. But yeah, if you're live if you're live there, Christian, please come join us. Yes, I would love to have a chat. Say thank you for your help on the channel.
Definitely only if you're live there. We don't want ghosts walking through.
It's terrible joke.
It's the lack of sleep. I tell you, I'm blaming it all on that.
Next week, Wednesday, we'll try and scooch in. We may change it by an hour depending on time zones. I need to figure that one out with the end of the event because there is, I think, a party on the end of the first day, and obviously we can't be doing the live like this during the event when a party is going on. It's not going to work. So we may switch by an hour or so. So we'll keep you posted. We'll post it on social media. Follow Fluttercon on Twitter, and you'll get notification there. Subscribe. Do all that kind of stuff. Yeah, subscribe to YouTube.
Like, thumbs up, all that stuff.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Show up. Yes, please.
And yeah, and I guess we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you next week live at Fluttercon. Bye.
Thanks, Simon. Bye, Simon.